Great. So while we start, just before we start, if you could, throughout the webinar, please feel free to add your comments into the chat box or any questions, and we'll do our best to answer and respond throughout the webinar. What would be great, I'm going to do a very quick introduction of who I am, but it would be wonderful if you could add into the chat box where you are joining us from and your nationality. So if you could all add into the chat where you're joining from and your nationality, I think that would be fun to look at as well later on when Christina is going through some of the slides. A very quick introduction about me. So my name is Vicky Dumelo. I'm the Group Training Manager at BBI Communication. I've been working with BBI now for almost 10 years. Remember to put yourselves on mute, please. Thank you. So my role is really looking at the quality assurance process, working with course content and design. I'm also a teacher, an English teacher, so I've been teaching English since 2006, I believe. Yeah, so enough about me, but welcome again to the webinar. BBI Communication, many of you know what we do already, but our main pillars of our business are our language services and our intercultural competence. We work with global mobility, international organizations, intercultural leadership, and culturally diverse teams. And we really strongly believe the connection between the intercultural and the language is something that we should all be really focusing on. So let me introduce you to the series of webinars that we have been doing this autumn. This is the third webinar in our series, How Culture Impacts Language Beyond the Lingua Franca. We have the last webinar coming up at the end of this month, which will be about effective communication and fluency gaps. Christina, if you can just do a couple of clicks and the QR code will come up there. So if you'd like to join that webinar, you can just scan the QR code now, and we'll share this again at the end of the webinar today. Okay, so to the next slide, let me introduce you to Christina Rundkrantz. She is one of our senior consultants for intercultural leadership at BBI Communication. She has been with the company longer than I have, since 2012. So we have, on many occasions, I've been very fortunate to join other webinars that Christina has led. She is based in Sweden and is Swedish, but has work experience all over the world. I mean, here it says London, France and Switzerland. I think it's more than that, Christina. I think you're being very humble there. Christina has a master's in languages and intercultural communication, and also has a training degree in French and English. So Christina works as a full-time intercultural trainer, and I am going to hand the floor over to Christina so that she can start with this really interesting webinar for today. So thank you, Christina. Welcome.
Thank you, Vicky, and a warm welcome to all of you joining us today. I see we have a very cultural diversity, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experience and expertise with you. And as Vicky said, feel free to join in the chat box if you have comments or objections or questions. So feel free. And today's topic is, of course, how culture impacts language. And we strongly believe that there is a connection, and this is what we're going to dive into today. We can talk about lingua franca too, and what we actually mean is really English today. It is not Mandarin as in China or like Hindi in India. it is English we talk about. And when we say lingua franca, of course, it's good to have a language that everybody understands. But as we're saying, don't underestimate the cultural impact on the way we communicate. And I see, and I think this little picture of one talking about snowballs and one about coconuts illustrates very well our topic today. Because with intercultural competence, you understand that the cultural background influences how they see the world. And I like the definition of intercultural competence is also to understand misunderstandings. So you understand why they talk about two different things. And of course, I see this every day in my trainings, the different communication styles, whether you're indirect or direct, whether you show expressions or not, and also certain words and idioms. And after these 60 minutes, and hopefully you can reflect yourself about your personal plan. How can I modify my communication style in order to be perceived the way I want to be perceived? So that's what it's about. It's about perceptions, isn't it? And we don't see things as we are, we see things as we are. This is a famous quote. And I think that intercultural competence, the more intercultural competence you have, the more glasses you have to put on, because you can see the world through different glasses and also realize how you're perceived. And this is a fascinating field. I know we have many experts in our groups today. So as I said, feel free to jump in if you have comments. You could actually define intercultural competence with different stages here. And first, I'd like to clarify the 3 steps of intercultural competence. I see it as number 1, self-awareness. Whatever leadership training you do, self-awareness is key. And here it's about knowing whether you are direct or indirect in your communication style. How do you handle feedback, for example, and how do you build trust? So be aware of yourself, and then knowledge about the other one, whether it's your client or your colleague. Find out why, and let's assume good intentions. If you are offended, maybe it's not a personality thing, maybe it's a cultural thing. So I like the universal rule: assume good intentions. But number 1 and 2 is not enough. You need number 3 as well, and that's an open mind, a willingness to modify your behavior depending on the receiver. It's a respect for another culture, and of course, it's a curiosity to an open mind. And here I like the picture between one who sees number 6 and one number 9. If you see number 6, that's fine. You don't have to agree with the one that sees number 9, but you have to understand that the other person sees another figure and maybe another world. So it's not about right or wrong. So let me also clarify this. I do that in all my trainings, actually. I clarify that I'm going to describe here different communication styles, but it's not right or wrong, better, worse. It's just different, and we should be different. That's the enriching part of it, what we bring to the table, isn't it? And the other clarification I have to do is that I am going to generalize. And isn't that dangerous? Isn't that stereotyping? I see a clear difference between generalizations and stereotyping. If I say, for example, most Germans tend to focus on punctuality, that's a generalization. If I say all Germans are punctual, that's a stereotype. So generalization is a starting point before you get to know the individual. And as you know, with research, because there's a lot of research in this field, it's done on a group level. So I could also generalize, I could say, see if you agree with me, Italian people tend to be more talkative than Finnish people. And then, of course, there are exceptions. There are very talkative Finnish people. I've met plenty of them. And then there are silent Italian people. I haven't met them yet, though. So you see what I mean with generalizations and stereotyping. So hopefully you're okay with me generalizing. Otherwise, we would have to stop the training or the webinar. And none of you is at the denial phase, then you wouldn't even join me here. And that's as if saying there are no cultural differences. Of course there are. We want the cultural diversity. That's what we bring to the table. But we don't polarize. We don't say one is good and one is wrong, but we don't minimize either, because we have to identify the gaps so that we can bridge the gaps. and accept that we are different. Adaptation, yeah, to a certain extent. We don't want everybody to be the same. So it's up to you to find your personal action plan. And I'm not going to check up on you. Because in Sweden, we trust you, that we don't want to control anyone. Okay, here I'm generalizing. What happens if you minimize? Here's an example, a failure story about minimization, miscommunication. This was a pharmaceutical company that launched a big sales campaign all over the world, and it was about headache pills. And they thought, we don't use words, so we don't need to translate it. Pictures say more than words. So they put these figures on the sad face with a headache, took a tablet, and became happy. Now you probably understand why this wasn't a good universal campaign. It just wouldn't work in all countries. Because, for example, in the Arabic language, you read from right to left, don't you? So that wouldn't land very well, would it? So you have a happy face, you take a medicine, and you become sad. So don't minimize culture differences. Be aware that if you read from right to left in this situation, it would be clearly a failed campaign, wouldn't it? Okay, that brings me to communication about proverbs and idioms. Now, be aware, we talked about English as a lingua franca. The difficulty is not just that we speak English with different cultural backgrounds or influences. It's also that some of us are native speakers and some are not. So it's really important to be aware of the advantage that native speakers have. And if you want to learn a language, I think it's a great way if you look into proverbs and idioms, because then you do not only learn the language or the words, but you also learn the culture. So let me clarify some of these typical proverbs from other parts of the world, and let me explain how they are influenced by culture. You probably know the one, speech is silver, silence is golden. And maybe that depends on how you interpret silence. Silence is positive in some cultures, and maybe it's negative. It's no commitment. It's a problem in some cultures, but it's a Latin proverb, so maybe it's more relevant in some cultures than others. So let me say this one: early bird catches the worm. I would say, if I generalize, and you said I could, that in Northern Europe, where you have more Protestant culture, the Lutheran work ethics, it's something good to get up early in the morning. So it's considered better to be early person, but we need the evening people too. Now, the one from Africa is, it takes a whole village to raise a child. It's a typical proverb from a very collective part of the world, or cultures are more collective. So it means that it's everybody's responsibility collectively to raise a child. And then in China, you have this one: the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. And it shows some sort of modesty, don't stick out. And it's really a contrast to the more American proverb, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So be aware, sticking out, speaking up is positive in some cultures, and maybe it doesn't come as easily in some other cultures. And the next one I took was better bad decision than no decision. And this lands well in the US, where you have more risk orientation and time is money. But in more reflective cultures, where you have consensual decision making, this just wouldn't be a proverb. So differences here in culture. So in Norway, as you might know, this proverb really reflects the culture of nature. It really is like religion in nature that brings happiness and reflection and harmony. So this is reflected by that proverb, sorry. And the next one would be a Swedish one. I took here: being alone is being strong. Sounds kind of negative. That I can do things myself. It reflects the culture of self-reliance. Not many people living in Sweden, you had to do things on your own. And I also call it the IKEA syndrome. You order a table, you can assemble it yourself. Maybe not so common in India, where you help out more. Now in France, I took this, it all works in practice, but it will never work in theory. So in the educational system, you have a really focus on theory. Less pragmatic, maybe you have the theoretical frame. So you want to make sure it works in theory. Maybe less pragmatic than other cultures. Fall between the cracks. I discussed the pandemic with a Brit, and we both agreed that some regulations or decisions fell between the cracks in Britain and Sweden, and so it was delegated, and nobody had responsibility. There was no process. So there, I asked the German, "Do you have a proverb that means fall between the cracks?" And the German said, "No, we don't need that proverb." Okay, maybe there is one, but maybe not so used. So this shows you how proverbs can reflect culture. And feel free to, in the chat box, if you have a specific proverb from your culture. I see that, David, you say the early bird gets the beach chair. Yeah, that's a good reason, David, to be early, isn't it? Right. Okay, so let's move on to some words that are difficult to translate. And why are they difficult to translate? It's because they reflect culture. So here I will try to explain why they reflect culture. So the Swedish word lagom is really something that is dominant in decision making, in modesty. Let's stay in the middle. Let's not have a strong opinion. Let's be neutral. Let's not stick out. A sort of conformism. It means not too much, not too little. We have middle beer, not too strong, not too light, middle milk, not too light, not too fat. In Denmark, you have the word hygge. And that means a cozy atmosphere, and it's everybody's duty to contribute to this hygge. And it could involve, it's a relaxed atmosphere, and it could involve some alcohol as well. A Danish person said to me, "Christina, it has to involve alcohol," but Swedes get a bit nervous when alcohol is introduced. And then in Finland, you have the word sisu. I'm sure we have some Finnish people with us. And that really reflects the perseverance of the Finnish culture, that you hang in there, you're strong, and you don't give up. And then in South Africa, they talk about Ubuntu. It's also a collective. It's the art of living together, and help each other, compassion, for example. And that is similar to the Chinese word of guanxi, which is also the social network. It's necessary privately, professionally. You help out, you have connections, and that is part of society in China. In Spanish, we have Spanish-speaking people here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but sobremesa means that it's this relaxing time after a meal, that you take time to speak and build relationships. Sobremesa, there's even a word for it. And I know that there's a similar word in Dutch too, gezellig. I like that you put that down, Elizabeth. And then Theodora, you said good fences make good neighbors. That could be a universal one, Theodora. I like that. And the sobremesa, I don't know, you say do business and sign contracts, right? So in Sweden, you wouldn't do that, but maybe you can pull out the contract after the lunch in Spanish. That's good to know. And in France, you have the savoir-faire, which means it could be everything from, well, etiquette, about table manners, how to do things. It's not just what you do, but to social skills. And that builds trust if you master savoir-faire, know how to do things. Okay, these were some examples, and I'm sure you can bring in more in the chat box of these different words we have. When we talk about languages and communication, we also have to talk about, we also have to talk about this triangle, where it is done by Richard Lewis. I did my certification in Great Britain with Richard Lewis, and he has this triangle or definitions of different communication styles. So according to a lot of research, he says that multi-active people, they tend to be able to do many things at the same time, and interruption is not so rude. Maybe it's a sign of engagement, and you build trust on people you know. And silence could be a bit negative. It means that you have nothing to say. How can I trust you? And I would say, if I generalize also, for multi-active people, words are for opinions. So you're supposed to say something. If we go to the reactive culture, that means good listeners. You react to what other people say before you speak. So silence is positive. And you build connections and you build trust on relationships. And words are actually, communication is more for building connections and building trust and relationships. And silence is positive. Now, the linear active communication style likes to do one thing at a time. You follow the agenda and you build trust on competence. It's called cognitive trust. In multi-active and reactive cultures, you're more effective trust. So you trust people who are punctual, who do what they promise to do. And silence could also be, maybe less so for the Americans, but silence could also signal reflection. So now I'd like to do a short survey here. And we'll see, where would you be if you try and think about in a workplace culture, where would you be closest? Would you be blue, purple, red, orange, yellow, or green? You try to submit your answer and see if we have a diversity in this little group here. So if you're purple, for example, you are fairly frank and you think communication is key, and you also value some sort of punctuality. If you are orange, that means that harmony is important in the communication style, but it's also important to say something. And the green color would be that punctuality, yeah, but also some sort of silence is positive and harmony is also important. So that was a way of trying to explain. And of course, culture is just one layer. Age and personality and profession plays a role here. The reddest they had found was a salesman from Brazil. The bluest they had found was an engineer from northern Germany. And the yellowest they had found was a diplomat from Japan. But let's see what we found here. So we have a majority of purple. So in this Swedish corner, we need some frank people, so that's good. Communication, red and orange. We don't have, if we had more people from Asia, I think we would have more from the reactive culture. So here we can actually analyze that if we want to have cultural diversity, we need to bring in some people from the reactive corner. So it's a good analysis. But thanks for contributing, and sure, this could serve as a base for further discussions in your teams or among colleagues. Right, and of course, I'm sure you have all the answers here. You don't see the outcome. Okay, we'll show again. So the blue and purple had majority. It doesn't surprise me when I see the nationalities here. It's not necessarily that you are what your nationality is, but according to assessments, it's quite accurate, this triangle. I've been working with it for more than 20 years. It's from a book called When Cultures Collide, and it's amazingly accurate. So blue, purple, red, orange, and some green as well. So thank you, and we'll stop sharing this. And as I said, I'm sure you have all the answers in the group how to actually communicate with different communication styles. But let me give you some advice. How would you communicate with people from the multi-active? My pieces of advice would be focus on relations, accept some flexibility, be a little bit more expressive. If you say to a Brazilian group, welcome to this meeting, I'm very happy to see you, it's not perceived as very welcoming. So it's not about going outside your comfort zone. It's about widening your comfort zone to be perceived the way you want to be perceived. And maybe since flexibility time is more dominant, so clarify deadlines and follow up a little bit more. Maybe people want to be verified so that they can show what they have achieved. So when you communicate with the linear active, maybe more the Northern European culture with the Lutheran work ethics, be on time and do one thing at a time, for example, that would mean that you are punctual, you stick to the agenda, and you do what you promise to do. You focus on task. If you focus on task, if you want to convince a linear active person, you present facts and maybe interrupt a little bit less. Communicate with a reactive. You have to be aware that you might not get a no. No doesn't, it could ruin harmony. It's like slapping somebody's face. So you would have to use open questions because you might not get a no. So when I communicated with a Japanese team, I asked them, for example, did you like my video and my film? And they said, we liked your film, Christina. And that means that they didn't like my video or my photos. They said, we like your video, Christina, meaning that they didn't like my photos. So what they didn't say was relevant. So you need to use open questions for this diplomatic culture, focus on harmony, modesty, be a good listener, read between the lines, and of course also if it's a hierarchical culture, respect these different positions. And patience, don't rush business. Okay, so those are some pieces of advice. And we have to talk something about body language too, because that's a big part of communication, isn't it? And I kind of like this little photo here where the Japanese guy, he knows how to shake hands in Europe, so he wants to shake hand, and the European guy has learned how to bow. So in the end, there's a collision again because we have adapted to the other one's culture. But let's assume good intentions here. And with greetings, I think the good piece of advice is to observe how we do and don't be offended. Close matters too, maybe more in some cultures. So close matter. And some people, like in where social etiquettes is more important in France and Italy, for example, if you don't dress up enough formally, people could say, oh, if you can't take care of your clothes, how can you take care of your products? So that some certain formality could promote trust. So be aware, clothes signal more in some cultures than others. And of course, also facial expressions. Not even a smile is universal. I talked to a Finnish guy once, and he said, yeah, if you smile in a Finnish bus, you're either crazy or drunk. So the face, of course, so the smile, of course, can open doors, but don't be offended if people might not smile back to you. In Asia, it could also be a sign of embarrassment, couldn't it? So David, you said, are opinions facts? That's a $10,000 question. I can't answer that question, but I would say the reason why I talked about where communication is for opinion is that for some community cultures, I think it's important to express an opinion. That's what I meant. Okay, gestures are important too. We have two gestures here as pictures. The thumbs up, for example. Sure, most people think that's positive and we assume good intentions, but it's actually offensive in some cultures. And also the okay sign, primarily positive, but in some African cultures that could be very offensive, also in some Latin American cultures. And the index finger, be aware, that could also be offensive. And we do know that in Thailand, for example, the head is sacred, and the feet in Middle East, it's the worst part. So if you show your soles in Middle East, it's perceived as very negative. So be aware, and if you don't know, ask and observe. I think that's good pieces of advice when it comes to body language. Now,
Christina, I'm
yeah,
just a comment that's in the chat box, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Is I had when we're looking at communication styles, I had a multicultural upbringing, and I feel my color depends on the language I'm speaking.
Right. Yeah, there is research on this. So when I speak French, I agree with you. I become a more formal person. And when I speak Swedish, maybe I become more of a listener. So that's really interesting comment to this one. You change, and that's putting on new glasses, isn't it? So it helps. The more languages you speak, the more you can put on different glasses. So a very relevant question. Thanks for adding that. And I also see that, Renaud, you say something regarding clothes. Dressing up too fancy can be another cultural misunderstanding. Yeah. So let's clarify. And the general rule here, Renaud, would be don't assume that your dress style or clothes style is universal. Right. Thank you very much. So this brings me to some research, because we want it to be evidence-based, so don't we? So this is from a book that I recommend. It's called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. She's done a lot of research in this fascinating field of intercultural communication. And she says, according to this book, that countries at the top here tend to be more emotionally expressive. Countries at the bottom here tend to control emotions. It's not about right or wrong. Maybe you don't even have to change here. So I'm coaching doctors coming into Sweden, and the Italian doctor, he got a question from his colleagues. They really admired his expertise, but they said to him, "Oh, you seem to, you raise your voice so much and you gesticulate, you're so emotionally expressive. Why are you so angry?" And he said, "I'm not angry, I'm just Italian." So be aware, if you get nervous speaking to these non-expressive cultures like Germans, Danes, and Swedes, you should be happy you're not in Finland. They are below this, this chart. So don't be offended, and modify if you need, but don't judge. The other one maybe is more important, whether you tend to be, it says confrontation. It doesn't mean that you like a confrontation. It means that frankness is top priority. You tell it like it is, and you don't get offended. And you can maybe separate facts and personality. Now, the countries to the right tend to avoid confrontation, tend to take criticism personally. So you would wrap up criticism, for example. So let me see. We're going to have a little poll here too. So Annabella, you can unmute yourself and ask while the rest of us will put in whether we are A, B, C, or D. But let's listen to you, Annabella. Okay, we're waiting for you. Okay, so what corner are you? Let's say in a workplace context here. If you are in the A corner, that means you're emotionally expressive and you are quite direct in your communication style. If you're in the B corner, this is kind of a tricky one for Europeans, because the B corner, you might be emotionally expressive, but harmony is key. I learned the hard way working with the Middle East and India and Brazil, for example. You can be expressive, but harmony is key. Now the C corner.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
sorry. What I wanted to tell is really what you were talking about. I've been born and raised in the Netherlands, but my parents are from Portugal, and I noticed that I'm very emotional and expressive. And my husband is a Dutch man, and he said, "Why are you talking so loud? Why are you talking so loud?" And when he went for the first time to Portugal, he said, "Now I understand why you're talking so loud." Because, and we are talking very expressive, and then we get, enthusiastic. We are talking louder. That's, I recognize myself. I'm born and raised here, but I recognize myself so much in this picture. Thank you so much. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's fine. I take interruption as a sign of engagement. So thank you, Annabella. That was thanks for sharing that story. That's a beautiful story. And this is a shortcut. Intercultural trainings is a shortcut to understanding culture. And you might not even be aware of it until you go to the country, as you said. And maybe we get the norms and values before the age of 10. And as you said, being expressive in the Middle East, it's sincerity. That's how I trust you if you don't raise your voice. And in Finland, we lose trust if you raise your voice too much. So be aware. So the C corner, as we said, that's showing less emotions and being frank, like Dutch people would say in Germans, and more so the Danes. And the D corner, where some of us are here, 12% according to the survey we do in this group. The D corner would mean less emotionally expressive, but also harmony is important. But be aware though that you might say the B and D corner, that's perfect, both are indirect. That can cause trouble if two indirect people communicate, because we are indirect for various reasons. The Swedes, I may say, are indirect because we don't want to be bossy and we don't want to launch negative feedback. In Brazil, maybe you're indirect because you don't want to say no to the boss. So be aware. Right. So we see we have diversity in this group. We have the A, B, C, and D corner. So thanks for sharing that. We can stop that now. We have diversity in this team, so we are safe. Cultural diversity. And David, you say having worked in 22 countries, I can say this is a great shot. Oh, I'm glad you confirm it. You don't have to agree with me. Thank you very much. So that brings me to my slide about direct and indirect communication. Let's have a specific example. It's a short dialogue here from an indirect person to a direct person. So the A person, he says, it looks as if we're going to have to keep the production line running on Saturday. It's a direct, fact-oriented statement. And the B person is from an indirect culture, and he says, I see. And already here, the A person says, can you come in on Saturday? And the B person says, yeah, I think so. Oh, yes, I think so, with some hesitation. The A person said, that'd be a great help. And then the B says, yeah, Saturday is a special day. How do you mean? It's my son's birthday. Oh, how nice. I hope he has a good day. Thank you. I appreciate your understanding. Now, if you are intercultural competent, you realize that it's not for sure that this B person will come in. The A person is from the direct culture. A yes is a yes, a no is a no. The B person is from an indirect culture. And the yes can mean, yes, I heard what you were saying. And then my advice here is to, if you are from a direct culture, you have to read between the lines. When the B says, I see, already here, watch out. And I think so, even if it's a yes, beware. So this could cause real miscommunication, couldn't it? Because you don't know whether the person will turn up or not, and that could cause a lot of frustration, of course. So be aware. This was just one example. I'm sure you have some in your context as well. So I will also want to bring up some things about silence, because you participate daily, I guess, in meetings where maybe we want to speak up culture. And I'm just thinking about speak up culture. Maybe we want speak up culture for cultures where you're supposed to voice your opinion. Maybe some people don't aspire for a speak up culture. Just be aware, because silence is perceived differently. If you get nervous about silence, maybe that's your problem. Maybe I'm fine with silence. Maybe that's respectful. So be aware in a virtual meeting, why are people silent? Is it because I agree with what you're saying? Otherwise, I would speak up. That could be a frank person, could be a German, that I agree and I'm silent. Otherwise, I would speak up. But it could also be somebody that says, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'm not going to speak up because harmony is key in the group. So be aware, that could be a Swede, for example. So silence could mean that you don't agree. Now, somebody could say, I'd rather listen than speak, and I'm just fine. Words are for information. That could be a Finnish person. And I'm fine. If I say something, I say something if I have something to say. And my English is bad. Don't forget, as I said, the non-native speakers, maybe we are less comfortable with the spoken word. So for us, maybe it's a good thing to send out documentation beforehand to make us familiar with the language and the topic, and also to prepare the person to speak. Because if you come from a diplomatic culture, like let's say China, maybe you won't speak unless you're asked to speak, and maybe you need to be prepared. And so Theodora, you say silence, ghosting in many cultures. Yeah. So it can mean many different things, right? So it could also mean I will speak after my boss. That wouldn't be somebody from Scandinavia. We have no problem challenging superiors. But recently I heard about a Japanese company. They asked Microsoft if they could put the camera, the video camera of the manager at the top of the screen so that the others knew when to speak, because they would like to speak after the manager. And they didn't do that, Microsoft. So be aware, you might have to call in speakers to speak. No, I don't want to lose face. That's the same Asian culture. Like if I have a question, maybe that's a stupid question, or even worse, my question could be a tricky question, so you won't be able to answer the question, and that would mean cause losing face, and that would be even worse. So in Renault, you say in Spanish, la calada por respuesta means no answer means I agree. Yeah, you know, Renault, I sometimes use that in my webinars. I say, if you don't speak up now, I take your silence as if you agree with me. I should have done that at the beginning when I asked for permission to generalize. So you clarify, Renault, what is silence from you? And then you say, because otherwise you would have to speak up. So I think that's a good universal rule. Be aware what silence means. Right. And I wanted to, since we talk about communication styles, I also wanted to give this example of the coconut culture and the peach culture. I'm sure you've heard about this metaphor of communication styles. I just want to see what Elizabeth says. Why didn't Microsoft put the pictures of the boss up if the team requested it? It isn't also about listening to the needs of others. Doesn't this mean the Japanese workers won't share their thoughts? Exactly. I mean, if we could modify our product according to clients, that would be perfect. But of course, there could be other issues as well. And but it's a relevant question, Elizabeth. It's sometimes hard to modify. Should you modify the car according to local needs, or should you not compromise on your safety regulations, for example? This is a dilemma, Elizabeth, sometimes. And Sylvia, you say, but also in Spanish, otorgo means agreement, because if you disagree, you should say it. Yeah. So thanks for sharing. This is very relevant for us to know. So Swedes speaking to Danes, we should know. If we don't say anything, they think that we agree. And maybe Dutch people too. Okay, so the coconut and this peach. The coconut is more, privacy is important. You have a hard shell, but once you're inside that shell, we are friends. And then we are friends forever. The peach culture, maybe you can approach a stranger, you're more talkative, it's easy to start the communication, but then you have the hard bit in the middle. So even if you have this first small talk, doesn't mean that you have trust. So here I took the example of the Swede, more reflective of the coconut culture. I would say most of the Scandinavian culture and also the Swiss culture, maybe the German culture too. And the Americans being more talkative, silence is negative, and more used to small talk. And of course, they have the advantage of speaking the native language too. And a little bit more direct, like you follow directions and give guidelines. And the manager is accountable and can give clear guidelines. And in Sweden, more vague expressions, not being bossy. And I want to say that 1 million Swedish people emigrate to America, and they were all the optimists, and here are we all the pessimists, or we think we are realistic. So this is a good cultural combination with realistic Swedes and optimistic Americans, maybe. And we want to see the worst case scenario when you present something, and Americans want to talk more about visions, more optimistic talk. And one more thing is downgraders. So Swedes use a lot of perhaps, maybe, you might be able to do that to soften the speech. And the Americans use more upgraders. This is tremendously good. This is excellent. This is awesome. So this could cause problems. I'll give you a quick story of an American company who bought a Swedish company, and all they heard were problems. So they decided we should sell this company because it seemed so bad. It was a bad purchase. But luckily, we found out this was a culture difference, because the Swedes didn't talk about the 95% that was good, because you don't want to be bragging. So all they heard was the 5% that was negative. So therefore, they got the wrong impression. So be aware and consider culture differences here. Upgraders and downgraders, speech differences. So this brings me to something about formality as well. I want to cover this aspect of culture differences. I take again a chart from Erin Meyer, and we're not going to discuss leadership here, but I'll mention the countries at the top here. They expect and accept that the manager decides. And at the bottom, it's consensual decision-making. The team decides. To the left, so maybe you would get clearer guidelines. The speech is reflected here too. The manager decides, you give clear guidelines. At the bottom here, you get more vague guidelines. You want to get everybody on board, for example. And more relevant for the communication today is the horizontal line between egalitarian cultures and hierarchical cultures. I could also say in this context, informal. So egalitarian, that means that it's a speak-up culture. Everybody can voice their opinion. It's the first names. It's no business cards. It's informal dress codes. And in the more to the right here, more hierarchical cultures, you would consider the dress codes, and you would consider titles. Maybe you would use the last names. So be aware here between formal cultures and formal cultures. And this is, of course, reflected in the speech. And it could be very uncomfortable for hierarchical cultures, for example, to meet this very informal culture of using the first names. It's really a struggle. And it seems disrespectful for some hierarchical cultures. So let's see what Elizabeth says here about, sorry, we talked about that. Okay, so be aware the difference between informality and formality. And this brings me to some clear differences in communication style. And here are some examples that I will bring up. And it's actually what could happen if a Brit talks to a Dutch person. So here we have a lot of culture differences. The Brit tends to be very diplomatic, very politeness is key, isn't it? And reluctant to be too direct when it comes to orders and also negative criticism. So so let me just see what Hanny says here about formality. Formal and informal still varies a lot depending on the company you deal with in the Netherlands. Yes, that's sure, Hanny. And we should mention that it's very not much connected to different professions. Yes, the IT business is definitely more informal than finance business being more informal than the finance business being more formal. So definitely that's a layer, the profession. So I'm just adding this cultural layer as well on top of everything else. But that's certainly very relevant what you're saying. So the Brits could say to the Dutch, I hear what you say. And Vicky, you have to correct me if I'm wrong. See if you can relate to this. It could mean something I disagree and don't want to discuss it any further. But the Dutch, don't forget that here we have a native speaker and a non-native speaker. So the non-native speakers tend to take it literally, not only because it's a direct culture, you say, tell it like it is, but also because we are not, the Dutch is not a native speaker. So he or she might think he accepts my point. And then the Brits say, with the greatest respect, which is really even hard to understand. What does it mean? And I would probably also think he's listening to me, but the Brit is an understatement of thinking, I think you're an idiot. And you would never say that. I see you laughing, Vicky, so hopefully you agree with me. And then
I do
British,
agree. I've seen this obviously before, Christina, when we were looking at the presentation, and as I mentioned, the actual the first line where it's "I hear what you say." It's not maybe a common phrase that I would use, because it does mean that, yeah, I don't agree with what you're saying. But I think I mentioned to you that I had it on the flip side, where a colleague in the Netherlands said to me, "I hear what you say." And so as I understood it, it means, okay, yeah, they don't want to talk about this any further. But it actually meant that they accepted my point of view. So yeah, it's interesting to see the flip side of that as well.
yeah, the flip side, like you say, being aware how you perceived exactly this. So thanks for sharing, Vicky. I talked to a British friend once, and he says, yeah, Christina, there's absolutely no correlation between what we say and what we think. So be aware. And not only that, you master the language as well. So thanks for clarifying, Vicky. And then that's not bad. That really means that's good. And we would think that's poor. Very interesting. That's a universal thing. Be aware. And the Swede goes home and works on the project for 2 weeks because he's impressed, but it's not. It's nonsense. And that's a brave proposal. That could mean that's really thinking too far outside the box, and etc. And I only have a few minor comments. Be aware. You're probably supposed to rewrite the whole thing. So let's clarify. The Brits should be aware how it's perceived and have sympathy with us who don't have English as a native language. And the rest of us should read between the lines. And if we don't understand, ask for clarification. Is this good or bad? And you can also throw in this cultural card saying, I'm not familiar with the British communication culture, so please clarify, do you mean that's good or bad? So then you make the Brit aware. Okay, so the next one would be a Swede talking to a Spanish person. So we have these nationalities in the webinar today. So you can also stop me if I'm wrong. If you don't say anything, I take it as if you agree with me. So the Swede doesn't want to be bossy. He says, do you have time to? And then we forget please, because we don't really have please in the language. And the Swede means do it. And the German or the Spanish mind, oh, he says, if I have the time, it's not an order. And then something goes wrong, and the Swede said, did we not agree? And he's furious, but you cannot read his face because we control our emotions. And then the Spanish person might think, oh, it's not such a serious mistake, but the Swede is really angry. And then the Swede doesn't want to commit too much, not overpromise too much. So I think we can manage this project. And it really means I promise we can do it. But for the rest of the world, it can be really lack of commitment, couldn't it? And here we challenge superior. Here my boss is wrong. And you think that you have a speak up culture, you challenge your superior. But in other cultures, it can be really disrespectful. And then modesty, you don't want to be bragging. You would say at the interview, you would say, I believe I'm fairly good. And then you know yourself, you're good. It's sort of, not supposed to say it, but you know it. And the rest of the world might think he's not very good. And also, like the Brits, you would say, I don't know if that's a good idea. And that really means it's a stupid idea. So be aware, right, how you perceived. And I'm sure you can do the same illustrations between different cultures speaking here. And this was an example of Swinglish. Swedes think we speak English, but we really speak Swinglish because we are influenced by our cultural background, as we've been saying. Okay, so I will soon wrap up, but I would like to add something about feedback too. And it's important. I don't think there's any universal feedback. If you go on a leadership class, how to give feedback, sure, there are some universal rules, but you also have to add the cultural layer because we expect different things. So the Indian person working in Sweden, he said to me, I think I will get fired any day. And I said, why? We don't fire people easily here. Well, I haven't heard anything from my manager. I haven't got any feedback for 8 weeks. So I think he's very disappointed with me. And I said, well, if you haven't heard anything, everything is fine. So silence for the Swede was positive, but it was really negative for the Indian person. So we need to bridge the gap here. Give more feedback, maybe, if the other person wants it and expects it. And I worked in Switzerland, and I overheard the American talking to the Swiss director. I just can't perform unless you give me positive feedback. And the Swiss director said, I'm not going to say that. If everything is fine, I won't say anything. And you need to bridge the gap here. Positive feedback is good on, I think that's universal. I think it works on everyone. It works on dogs, it works on my husband, it works everywhere. Positive feedback is good. So the Spanish person in the US, not only is not a native language, but Americans tend to learn the sandwich technique, how you wrap up negative criticism. You say something good, something bad, something good. And the Spanish person might not think that's an optimal way of giving feedback. And not being aware of it, he might not even read what's in the middle. And the German might say, that's sugarcoating. Tell me what you want me to do. So be aware. And the Finnish person may be more skeptical. Charisma could be negative, and upgraders is negative. And I want you to show me the worst case scenario. You're talking about the visions and the excellent scenarios. So I want the worst case scenario. And the Dutch person maybe thinking that constructive feedback, that's a compliment. I know you can do better. So for Swedes, are more like the Americans here, we wrap it up in a sandwich technique. And the Swede in Germany, and this is maybe universal for the Asian cultures too, you just do not give feedback in front of the group. You give it one-to-one. So of course, some universal rules here. Make sure you understand what the other one expects, and one-to-one feedback maybe, and also assume good intentions. I like that one as well. So this brings me to my last slide here. And it's actually a bit of a paradox, isn't it? I've just been saying that we need to modify our communication style, but here I want to give some universal rules how to communicate across cultures. But I still believe that we can do that with a tweak, of course. So my first piece of advice would be curious about culture differences and realize how they impact your communication. Be aware how you perceive. And it's a fascinating field, and there's so much to learn. The more we interact, the better we are with intercultural competence. And treat people the way they want to be treated. I think that's a golden rule too, especially when it comes to feedback. And don't assume that your communication style is universal, not better or worse. Don't judge. Assume good intentions. Develop your cultural competence by being aware of how you perceive, and read between the lines, especially if you are from a direct culture, and then also ask for clarification in order to avoid miscommunication. And maybe even ask why. Why do you want feedback this way? Or why are you not comfortable speaking up? Or why is constructive feedback so positive, etc. And I think this is a good universal rule. I think if the whole world spoke slower, we would have less miscommunication. And it's not that easy to say. I said that to an Indian person. He said, in my culture, if you speak fast, that's a good sign. If I start speaking slowly, then I'm treating you as if you don't understand. But still, don't forget that we're not used to the different accents, and we're not used to the British understatements or the American sports idioms, etc. So speak slowly and clarify abbreviations, because they might not even be used in the other culture. And even if they are used, they might be defined differently. So if you use them, clarify them. And also, I could have a whole seminar on humor too. And I think humor is excellent, is an excellent communication tool to bridge gaps. But be careful with humor, and also with irony. If you think that's sort of your humor, it's not perceived the same thing everywhere. So be careful of what the idioms you use, and if you use sarcasm or cynicism, etc. Humor is not universal. Use it if you know for sure it will be perceived positively. And the last slide would be assume good intentions and enjoy your cultural diversity, because it surely is enriching to learn from others. You don't need to learn from your own mistakes. You can learn from other people's mistakes. And I wanted to see what you said here in the chat box before we wrap up. So in Spain, you also use the sandwich technique, you said. Right, that's all. Okay, so let's keep those. If you have specific clarifications or questions, drop us an email, and keep enjoying your diversity. And that was my last slide. So with that, I would like to thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina.
And enjoy your afternoon. And I'll leave it to you, Vicky, to wrap up with your final slide here about further trainings or webinars. Thank you very much, everyone.
So just a big thank you, Christina, for this webinar. You know, having a look at really how culture impacts our communication. I think we've got a lot to reflect on here from the points you've given, and some useful tips at the end. So thank you for that. And if you would like to join our last series for this autumn, which will be this month as well, then you can join us on the 30th of November between 10 and 11, same timing. You'll be sent some information as well, so you can just click on the Zoom link and join us then. So thanks everyone, have a great day, and hope to see you at the next webinar.